Have you ever met someone who still remembers life before the internet, but also can't imagine living without it? Someone who played outside until the streetlights came on, memorized phone numbers, and rewound cassette tapes with a pencil, but also adapted effortlessly to smartphones, social media, and digital life. Maybe that person is you, and maybe, deep down, you've always felt like you don't fully belong to either world. Too young to be truly old school, too old to be truly digital native. If you were born between 1976 and 1985, you belong to a small, psychologically unique group, often called Xennials, not quite Generation X, not quite Millennials, something in between. A psychological bridge between two different realities. And this strange in-between position didn't just shape what you experienced. It shaped how your brain adapted, how you trust people, how you deal with uncertainty, and even how you see yourself, because Xennials didn't just live through change, they were neurologically molded by it. Imagine being a child in a world where information was scarce. If you wanted to know something, you had to go find it. Libraries, encyclopedias, teachers, parents. Information had friction. It required effort. Now imagine becoming an adult in a world where information became instant, infinite, and overwhelming. Your brain didn't grow up expecting constant stimulation. It had to adapt later. This is where the psychology gets fascinating. Research in developmental psychology, including work influenced by Erik Erikson, shows that the brain's sense of identity forms strongly during adolescence and early adulthood. This is when you decide how the world works, how people behave, and who you are within it. For Xennials, this identity formation happened right at the moment when the world itself was transforming. As teenagers, they lived in an analog world of physical presence. Social life required effort. If you wanted to talk to someone, you called their house, and maybe their parent answered first. There was vulnerability in that. You couldn't curate yourself endlessly. You couldn't edit and re-edit your personality before presenting it. People saw you as you were. Then suddenly, in early adulthood, everything shifted. The internet arrived. Email arrived. Social media arrived. And for the first time, identity became something you could construct. This created a psychological duality. On one hand, Xennials developed deep comfort with real-world interaction. They learned social cues, eye contact, patience, and emotional nuance before screens became dominant. On the other hand, they also learned digital fluency early enough to integrate it seamlessly into their lives. This combination is incredibly rare. Psychologist Turkle, who studied how technology shapes identity, found that people who grew up before constant digital immersion tend to maintain a stronger sense of core self. Their identity isn't as dependent on external validation through likes, comments, or digital approval. Why? Because their sense of self formed before constant feedback loops existed. Their brain learned stability first. Adaptation came second. And that order matters. Xennials often trust their own internal judgment more than younger digital natives, but they're also more flexible than older generations who struggled to adapt to technology at all. They remember what life felt like before, constant comparison, and that memory protects them. But there's another side to this. Xennials often carry a quiet psychological fatigue that's hard to explain. They were told to follow a predictable path. Study hard, get a degree, get a stable job, stay loyal, work hard, and life would reward you. And then, right as they entered adulthood, the rules changed. Economic instability, technological disruption, entire industries vanished or transformed. The psychological contract they grew up believing in quietly dissolved. Research from the Pew Research Center shows that Xennials experienced one of the most dramatic workplace transitions in modern history, moving from stable, linear career expectations to unpredictable, constantly evolving professional environments. This creates a unique cognitive pattern. Xennials tend to be both idealistic and realistic at the same time. They remember believing in stable systems, but they also learned through experience that systems can collapse. This makes them more psychologically resilient, not because they avoided uncertainty, but because they survived its arrival. Their brain learned flexibility through necessity. There's also something deeply important about how Xennials experienced boredom. As children, Boredom was normal. There was no instant escape, no endless scroll, no infinite entertainment machine in your pocket. Boredom forced creativity. It forced imagination. It forced introspection. Modern neuroscience shows that boredom activates the brain's default mode network, the system responsible for self-reflection, creativity, and meaning-making. When your brain isn't constantly distracted, it turns inward. It starts building identity. Xennials had more uninterrupted access to this mental state during critical developmental years. They learned how to be alone with their thoughts, and that's becoming increasingly rare. This often makes Xennials more comfortable with solitude, more capable of deep thinking, and less dependent on constant stimulation. But it also means they're more aware of existential questions. They've seen enough change to understand how temporary everything is. They watched entire technologies rise and disappear. Cassette tapes, CDs, landlines, physical maps. They experienced impermanence firsthand, and that subtly changes how you see the world. There's also a fascinating trust pattern that emerges in Xennials. They tend to be skeptical, but not cynical. They remember a time when institutions felt more stable, when information was slower, but often more trusted. But they also witnessed the explosion of misinformation, digital manipulation, and information overload. This creates a balanced skepticism. They don't blindly trust, but they also don't completely disconnect. Extensively about generational psychology, showing that people who grow up during transitional periods often develop stronger adaptive intelligence. They become skilled at navigating ambiguity because ambiguity became their normal. Xennials didn't grow up with certainty. They grew up with transition, and transition trains the brain differently than stability does. It trains pattern recognition, it trains flexibility, it trains emotional endurance. Another subtle psychological trait of Xennials is their relationship with nostalgia. For them, nostalgia isn't just sentimental, it's grounding because they've lived in two fundamentally different worlds. Nostalgia becomes a way to reconnect with a version of reality that felt slower, simpler, and more predictable. It reminds their nervous system of stability. This is why many Xennials feel emotionally attached to seemingly small things. Old songs, old devices, old routines. These aren't just memories, they're anchors, proof that their identity existed before everything accelerated. But perhaps the most powerful psychological strength of Xennials is their adaptability. They didn't resist change, they absorbed it. They learned analog systems first, which taught patience, persistence, and effort. Then they learned digital systems, which taught speed, efficiency, and flexibility. Their brain holds both operating systems simultaneously. They can function without technology if needed, but they can also navigate technology with fluency. This dual competence creates a quiet confidence. They know they can survive disruption, because they already did. If you're a Xennial, you might have noticed something about yourself. You don't panic easily when the world changes. You adjust, you observe, you figure it out. Because your brain was trained in uncertainty, you learned that identity isn't tied to a specific environment. It's something you carry internally, and that's incredibly powerful. You are one of the last groups of humans who experienced a fully analog childhood and a fully digital adulthood. You remember both versions of reality. You understand both languages, and that gives you something rare. Perspective. You know that technology is a tool, not a foundation. You know that identity exists beyond screens. You know that connection isn't defined by constant access. And most importantly, you know that humans can adapt to almost anything because you already have . So if you've ever felt like you don't fully belong to one generation or another, that's not a weakness. That's your strength. You are the bridge. You understand where we came from and where we're going. And in a world that's changing faster than ever, people like you aren't lost. You're essential. Because you remember how to stay human in the middle of transformation. And I'm curious, if you are a Xennial, do you feel more connected to the analog world you grew up in, or the digital world you adapted to? Or do you feel like you exist somewhere in between? Let me know your experience.